Hey y'all, so just a quick disclaimer before we get into today's Topical Tuesday. First thing is we have a lot of images in this video today. So if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you would like to see the images, make sure you head on over to our YouTube channel and watch the video as you are listening along. Second thing is, this is going to be part one of two of our Topical Tuesday here. So if you listen to today, make sure you tune in for part two in the up and coming weeks.
Hey y'all!
Hey y'all!
Hey y'all!
This is J1.
And this J2, and we have
Tina Filmer. Yay!
Back with you.
Yes.
Well, this is Tuesday, Topical Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Jack?
Mm-hmm.
So, we gonna let Tina take it away?
Yeah, we have a awesome topical for today, so go ahead.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what I believe is the location of Jesus Christ, crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. In January 2023, which was 3 years ago, my husband and I had an opportunity to fly to Israel. And on the last day, we were able to go see this location. And it was my favorite location that we visited in all of Jerusalem. And basically, it's called the Garden Tomb in Golgotha. And I have to start out with a disclaimer. I cannot say for 100% this is the place where Jesus was crucified. There is another location called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is regarded as one of the possible locations. However, if you step away from tradition and you just read the biblical account, all evidence points to my location as the place where Jesus was crucified and not the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But I can be wrong, but I just want to provide the evidence today because I believe this site truly makes sense. And that's what we're going to talk about.
Awesome. And don't they teach that a little bit too when they taught both when you went on that Israel trip, right?
They did mention that as a possible second location, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built. Basically, people have believed for 1700 years that that was the site. You can look on YouTube, and there's a lot of YouTubes that you'll find that really promote that site. However, I think there is evidence against that site, and I think there's evidence for the Garden Tomb. And that's what I'm here to tell you today.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. If we just look in scripture alone and the gospel accounts, we find so many clues. So the first clue is Golgotha. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all referenced a very specific place where Jesus was crucified. And this is what they said, John 19. Then Pilate delivered Jesus to them to be crucified. Then they took him and led him away, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. So it was a very specific place. It's also called Golgotha in Hebrew, and in Latin it's called Calvary. So that's the first clue.
Mm-hmm. And
Is
scripture.
that it's scriptural, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all say the same thing. He went to the place of the skull. So that's the first clue. So just to let the audience know, I've created a PowerPoint that we're kind of following along right now. So when we come to the next page, J1, J2, you can see the picture of Golgotha.
Yeah.
What do you see?
A skull.
A skull. With
You,
eyes.
you can see on the side of this, it's called an escarpment, but they also call it a cliff. It's a very steep cliff, about, I think it's like 50 feet high. When you look at it, you very clearly see a human skull in the rock face.
Yeah, you do.
This picture was taken in the late 1800s. You can see camels. You can see there was a road right next to it.
And that next one's even closer, close up.
Right. So it was discovered in 1842. You know, sometimes I wonder why things were discovered so late, but I found out the answer.
Okay.
in AD 70, the Jews they had to flee Jerusalem. The Christians fled Jerusalem in like AD 66. Many of the Jews fled Jerusalem in AD 70 when the Romans came in and ransacked it. Even later than that, the remaining Jews, they had to leave Jerusalem. And then Jerusalem was then controlled by many different empires. The Byzantine Empire, they were controlled by Muslims, Crusaders, Muslims again. All these different people groups were in charge of them. So really the Jews were not there for many, many, many years, hundreds of years, until after oh my goodness, I'm losing track of this. Israel was reborn in 1948 after the war, but people had begun going over there again in the 1800s. So if you can just imagine what these civilizations would do is they would Jerusalem was ransacked by the Romans, and then the Romans rebuilt Jerusalem. So then the Romans were defeated. And so these civilizations, they just build on top of one another. So when you go to this location today, which is where I believe Jesus was crucified, at the place of the skull, also called Skull Hill, that's what it's called today, it's very likely that Jesus was crucified at least 10 feet below that.
Oh, wow. Because of the building.
Because of all the civilizations building on top of each other. So most everything was buried. Now, in the 1800s, the British went in and multiple people noticed a skull face right there. They could see it from the Temple Mount. And many people started wondering if that was Skull Hill because it looks like the face of the skull. It has forehead. It has like places for brows, 2 hollow areas for the eyes. It has a nose and it has a mouth. And even if you look at the profile of it, the nose it protruded out. Now, the nose that consists of rocks, it slid off about, I don't know, within the last 10 years. So when I went there, it was noseless, but you'll see what it looks like today. But anyway, the cliff is 50 feet high, and it is located in an abandoned quarry, going all the way back from the days of Solomon, the days of Herod. So this was a quarry. This site is the peak of Mount Moriah. Now that is very, very important because in Genesis 22, God commanded Abraham to take his one and only son to Mount Moriah. Now in Jerusalem, there are 3 mountains. They're right in order of each other. They're kind of parallel. The middle one is Mount Moriah. So even dating back to Abraham, Mount Moriah was a chosen mountain. And Abraham, along with 2 men, his helpers, took Isaac to one location on Mount Moriah, and they split the wood there for a burnt offering. And it says in the scriptures, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, meaning he was looking above him. And he saw the place afar off, which meant he had to go to the next level. So Mount Moriah has 3 levels. Today, when you see the Dome of the Rock, that's actually at the Temple Mount where the Jewish temple previously resided. Okay? That's the middle landing. But there is a higher peak. And the highest peak of Mount Moriah is this Skull Hill. Which is extremely important because Abraham almost sacrificing his only son is a parallel to God the Father ultimately sacrificing his only son. Yes. Jesus, to fit that, and also Abraham in that moment when the ram was provided, he was able to see the future, and he knew that God would provide the ultimate lamb, which he did, Jesus Christ. Also, ancient sacrifices all through the Bible, all through the Old Testament, the Israelites were in trouble because they would always go to the high places. There's a reference of high places, high places, high places. In the ancient times, people would go to the highest mountain peak to make sacrifices to their gods. So Abraham would have gone to the highest peak. And this is very significant because Abraham and Isaac was a foreshadowing of God sacrificing his one and only son. It only makes sense that it would happen at the same place.
Yeah.
It would happen at the peak. This is Skull Hill. Now, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not even located on Mount Moriah. It's not even on the mountain.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
It is west of the Temple Mount, and it's not even on the mountain. So that's one piece of evidence. If you just go by the biblical account, it does not make sense that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre could be the place of crucifixion. The other piece of evidence is Stephen, 6 months later, was martyred here at this location. So reading about the ancient executions, typically they would have one place. Like they didn't do executions all throughout the city. Okay. There was a stench. It would take place outside of the city walls. And on the west side was, it was one of the palaces. I can't remember if it was Herod's palace, but it was one of the rulers' palaces. And it would not make sense to put the place of crucifixion right next there with the western winds. That area was known to have western winds, and the stench would have blown there. So anyway, there was really one main execution site. Stephen was executed here, and it really makes sense that this is the place of where Jesus would have been crucified. Now, if you turn to the next picture, you see the people standing on a flat rock. Do you see that? Yeah. That is the Temple Mount.
Oh, that is.
And they're looking upward at the skull. So the skull is north of the city walls. There's also something else. If you go back to Leviticus 1 required all the animal sacrifices in the Old Testament, they had to be placed north of the altar. That was a rule. And the priests had to follow the rules to the T. Well, guess what? Skull Hill is north.
See, too much evidence.
I mean,
Scripturally alone, which is what we would stick with anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so biblical scholars in the late 1800s, when they saw this as a possible Skull Hill, they were like, wait a minute. We've been taught that the crucifixion took place over here, but if you really just study the biblical account, that's not matching. Okay.
Very good.
So
Most
then
people
moving.
Don't know that.
I'm sorry?
Most people, like I had no clue of this stuff until you came back from Israel.
I've never heard of this. I just imagined that Jerusalem was so big that they would never be able to find it. But these ancient walls, I'm going to show you a picture of how big the walls are in just a minute. The walls are like 3/4 of a mile in length. And so it's actually not a very large place. You can get on those walls and you can walk the perimeter of the walls, and it takes less than 4 hours. Like the ancient walls. I mean, they take people on walking tours, and it's not as large as you would imagine. So the crucifixion would take place outside the city gate. Actually, that's what we're going into. But before I go into that, do you see a picture of what it looks like today?
Yeah.
You can still see the eye sockets. There's a little bit of wear and tear. And then when Joe and I are standing there, we're standing there at the Garden Tomb location. It's a tourist site. You're kind of looking at the profile, so it's kind of hard to see. But today it's a bus depot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I see the buses in that picture.
So now we go into clue number 2. So Mark 15 says they led him out of the city to crucify him. They brought him to the place called Golgotha. John 19 says the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. So Golgotha was not only outside of the city, but it was near the city. So those are very important biblical accounts. Then, if you look at Hebrews 13, it said, now this is taking us back to the Old Testament when they sacrificed animals. The bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. Therefore, let us go forth to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. So you see, Jesus had to be crucified outside the gate, outside the camp. And so really the camp was like, the ancient walls, and there's multiple gates there that you can go through today. So he could not be sacrificed, and the Romans would not do any crucifixions inside the city gate. They had to do them outside the city gate. Okay, now we have to ask ourselves, is Golgotha outside the city gate? So if you look at the next picture, which says Jerusalem Old City Gates. This is kind of hot. This is an aerial view of ancient Jerusalem and the walls. Can you see the walls surrounding it? Okay. Now, I think these walls have been extended a little bit. There could have been even like less square footage or during the time of Jesus. But look at the north part, which is the Damascus Gate. So we believe that he would have walked through the Damascus Gate. Golgotha is so close to that Damascus Gate. It is 250 yards away from that gate. Outside the gate. Yeah. And and you know what? You can go on YouTube and you can find a walking tour of walking from the Damascus Gate to Golgotha. It's a very short walk, and you can kind of experience yourself because there's all kind of walking tours on YouTube. So it's clearly outside the city gate. Now, clue 3 is it was near a busy highway in an open area. This is how we know this, because Matthew 27 said, those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads. The people or the crowd of spectators stood looking on. So we love this famous hymn. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross. Okay, so just scrap that, because there's no evidence in the biblical account that he was crucified on a hill. That's not really valid. The author of that hymn included that little point. The Romans required that crucifixions would be held at major roads. The reason, and I found this out, I forgot this, but I reread this. The Romans actually required spectators to stop and watch crucifixions. And the reason they did that was to instill fear in them.
Yeah, I could see that being the motive.
And so they needed a main road. And if you kind of go back, remember the first picture you saw? You see that was a clear road right in front of the place of the skull. There had to be crucifixions on a main road. So the spectators had to stop and watch. So it could not have been on top of a hill. It was like they had to be at ground level. They stood and they spat on him. Had to be at ground level, okay? So this abandoned quarry was a perfect site for this. Now, here's just something extra. There was a Roman writer by the name of Quintilian, and this is what he wrote, quote, "Whenever we crucify criminals, very crowded highways are chosen so that many may see it and many may be moved by fear of it."
That's a writer.
That's an ancient writer. I did not look up when he lived.
That's okay. Wow.
Okay, so it was near a busy highway, and you can see that Skull Hill accounts for that. It's right in front of a highway. Passersby would have been able to clearly see him. Okay. Now, this is really important too. Jesus' crucifixion occurred during the Passover feast. It is anticipated that there were potentially 2 million Jews who traveled to the Old City. They were required to go travel to Jerusalem during Passover. To accommodate for this, Jerusalem had order. They had specified locations where different people could camp. So people camped. The people who were coming in from the western side camped on the west. So did the people coming from the southern side, they camped in the southern area. The people on the eastern side, they camped on the eastern area. So just imagine there's almost 2 million Jews here. Interestingly, the Samaritans were assigned to camp in the north. This is the north. However, the Samaritans did not go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. The Samaritans went to Mount Gerizim. I don't know if that's how you say it. Mount Gerizim, Gerizim. That was the place where they celebrated the Passover. So the Samaritans weren't there at the Passover. So the only open area to see a crucifixion was the north, where people were not camped. It was an open area.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
So it would have been the only spot, basically.
It would have been the only spot, because I want you to, ancient Jerusalem is not large.
Yeah, I was looking at that map.
It's not large.
Yeah.
So if 2 million Jews would have gone there to celebrate the Passover lamb in this whole feast celebration, they were jam-packed.
Yeah. Imagine 2 million in that surrounding.
So it doesn't make sense that you would pick a crucifixion in the middle of all these camps. But the northern area, and it makes sense that you would pick it in an old unused, in an old, a quarry. It was an open area. Right. And also, Mark 15 says, as Jesus was carrying that cross, they compelled Simon was from a different country, they compelled Simon, as he was passing by, to bear the cross. So, Simon was there from a different country, and he was there to celebrate the Passover. So...
Can I ask you a quick
Sure.
In that picture, it almost looks like that there's a flat little section in front of the skull where you could see, where they could, if I'm understanding right, where they could put 3 crosses, or, crucifixion crosses. You know what I'm saying, in the picture in front of the skull mountain?
Right.
There's a little flat section and then the road. So you could not miss it if it's placed somewhere within that vicinity. Am I looking at?
There is a very specific section, and I was not prepared to speak about this tonight, but we can include a picture. So in the scriptures it says that they put signs above him that said King of the Jews. Yeah. So right there at this place, there. So this is rock.
Yeah.
Okay, and right there at that place where we built at Skull Hill, there is a place, and I'll include pictures of this, where there are some indentions in the bedrock. It looks like there are 3 indentions where they would have placed those signs.
Oh, okay.
And so, when you go there today, they're cut out indentions where they would have put a sign in it. And so there are some people that believe that's probably where the signs would have gone. Yeah.
And you saw this in person.
We saw that in person.
So
yeah.
for the people listening that are viewing, I want them to understand your point, because when you look at the picture, it's the second slide, right? You've got the road.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a little hill above,
right.
Just a smidge of a hill,
right? Mm-hmm.
Where you could see this. You couldn't miss the crucifixions when you're walking by, and then right here you've got the skull.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense.
That's right.
And it's a mockery. They want to mock who's getting crucified, and humiliate them, and so forth and so on. And anybody to see them, you got to come through that road to get into part of the city. Yeah, very, 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 very sad for what happened, but very amazing that the scripture pointed everything out. And we've got these evidence of rocks and all the other stuff you're bringing up. Okay, I just wanted to make that point because I thought that got me.
So I want to just very quickly go over the timeline of the crucifixion of Jesus. So this is really interesting. According to the Jewish calendar, we know Jesus was crucified on Good Friday. And some people believe it was like 80, 30, 31, 32, 33. Oh, by the way, I have to give credit to author Derek Walker. Much of this information is coming from a book that he authored. It's called Mount Moriah, Golgotha, and the Garden Tomb. It's on Amazon, and it is fascinating, and he spells out all the evidence. He is the senior pastor of Oxford Bible Church in the UK, and he's amazing. Some of these pictures are on my own, and there's a lot of resources on the internet where you can see these pictures for yourself. But according to his belief and his research, is that we believe Jesus was crucified on Good Friday on April 3rd, AD 33. Now, it's very interesting because if you follow through this timeline, Mark 15 says it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. So that would have been at 9 a.m. And then Luke 23 says it was now about the 6th hour, which was noon. And there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour at 3 p.m. while the sun's light failed. And at this point, Jesus called out with a loud voice and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, interestingly, NASA, their records confirm that there was a lunar eclipse that occurred on April 3rd, AD 33, which could explain the darkness. But what I also want to point out is that Jesus suffered as the sacrificial lamb at Golgotha, the place of the skull. He sacrificed on the cross from 9 a.m. until he surrendered to death at 3 p.m. But nearby, only 250 yards to the Damascus Gate, and not far from the Damascus Gate into the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount is basically flat. Like today, it's like 30-something acres of flat cement. Back then, it was a much smaller area. But the temple was there. And nearby at the temple, there were 2 million Jews all come together. Mm-hmm. And the priest were sacrificing the Passover lamb, which was also slaughtered at 3 p.m. So while all those Jews were either in the temple, like they were near the temple, inside the city gate, or maybe some were camped out, they were all there for Passover because the lamb was being sacrificed, while at the same time, the lamb, the savior of the world, was paying the ultimate sacrifice.
Oh my word.
So do you see how God, God is, everything is planned out. Everything is to the T. And when he gave, when he started the first Passover, when the Israelites fled, when they exited from Egypt, that was the first Passover. And that first Passover, they were called to celebrate that annually. And the purpose for that, it was a dress rehearsal. Yeah. Because basically he was teaching them, your Messiah is going to come. All of the Passover, the sacrificial lamb, it all points to Messiah. Mm-hmm. So I can't remember how many years it was, maybe at least 1,500 years from Moses, from the Exodus to Jesus. Every year they did that, except I think maybe some of the kings stopped doing that, after the time of the judges and the time of the kings, they stopped doing some of the Passovers. the Passover and all the feast of the Lord were dress rehearsals. And when the final event happened, they missed it.
Yeah, just mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. But it all occurred to a T, just like Abraham being told to sacrifice Isaac. God the Father had to sacrifice his God the Son, and it had to happen at the same location, at the same time. Everything is very symbolic. It has to be accounted for to the T.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next clue. Okay, so John 19. Now, in the place where he was crucified, so remember, it is a specific place. In the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. Okay, now that's clue number 4. Okay. And in the garden, a new tomb, clue number 5, in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. So there was a garden. So, we could have, when we think of garden, we think of all these images. We could think of a flower garden. We could think of, some tomatoes. But when they reference garden, they're referencing a real working garden. Okay? Now, I did a little bit of a timeline for this. I think I'm going to review the timeline with you later. But the first thing that happened was all these people noticed Skull Hill. And there was a man by the name of Gordon. He was a British officer. And he actually wrote about Golgotha and Skull Hill as being the possible place of crucifixion. Many people had noticed it, but he was pretty famous, so it kind of came into light, and a lot of people started reading about it. So when they followed all these biblical scholars, they said, well, if this is Golgotha, then there's going to have to be a tomb nearby, and there's going to have to be a garden nearby. But they didn't know, because everything was buried, right? So they started doing all these excavations, and they had to dig pretty far down. And in 1924, they discovered one of the largest wine presses found in Israel. Now, if you've got a wine press, that is a really big major clue that there's probably some grapes that are being grown there. Okay, because they're probably not going to have a vineyard miles away in this random wine press. So this is evidence that this garden was probably a vineyard. Also, remember the biblical account says that Jesus was buried in a rich man's tomb. If you owned a vineyard, you were rich. Okay. Now, okay, so I want you to get a look at this cistern. If you turn to the next page, this cistern is the 3rd largest rainwater cistern in Jerusalem. It is 40 feet deep, which means it's almost 3 stories deep. So imagine you're going to the medical doctor and you go to the 3rd floor. That's how deep it is into the earth. It can hold enough water to keep a large plantation green for 8 months, because Israel has dry seasons where they don't receive rain. It can hold 200,000 gallons. So if you look at how large that ladder is and how deep it is. So it had to be a cistern holding rainwater. So this evidence demonstrates that there was a working garden and it was owned by a rich man. Now, not only that, they also found 2 other underground cisterns, and there's evidence of one of them holding wine bottles. Okay. Also in John 20:15, fast forward ahead, Mary Magdalene, when she went to the grave, Jesus said, "Why are you weeping?" It says in scripture, she supposed him to be the gardener. So if you've got a large vineyard, you're probably going to have a lead gardener. Okay. So, Okay, but then, so not only was a very large wine press discovered, but not one, but 3 cisterns were found in this garden.
3 of them, and that was
Yes.
one of the largest.
This is one of the largest, but there were 2 more. And so if you think back to the biblical account says that Jesus was taken to the place of the skull outside the city, near the city, and nearby was a garden.
Okay. Interesting. He mentions just. I think it's just he given evidence because the future needed to know these things to tie it all together. Because he didn't have to put in a garden nearby. Like what was I know he's given directions of where this place is at, but that's pretty cool. I think that he labels it to that.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. Thank you, God.
But when I saw that cistern, I was blown away.
Hey y'all, so that is a wrap on today's episode of Golgotha presented by Tina. We will have part 2 in the up and coming weeks, so please stay tuned and mark your calendars.